Welcome back. In this channel, we're talking about how to disciple our children. How can we bring our children into that saving relationship with Jesus Christ? But it's one of those things that's actually easier said than done. I mean, how how do we get from point A to point B? So, in this video, we're going to be talking about what actually is discipleship and how do we actually do it. Let's get started. Before we can get too deep into this, we have to actually say, what is our main goal? I mean, as parents, we need to be working towards that goal, don't we? I mean, how can we ever achieve that goal if we're not completely sure what it is? We've said it before on this channel, and we're going to say it again because it's clear that we need to work with that goal in sight. And that goal is bring our children into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. I think that's something we can all agree with. That is the goal of Christian parenting, is to bring our children into that relationship with Jesus Christ. But again, easier said than done, because teaching relationships is complicated. It's hairy. It's not like teaching anything else. You see, if I wanted to pass on an object to somebody, I can do that with absolutely no communication. Basically, you just hand it to them and they can receive it. You don't have to speak the same language. You don't have to understand each other at all, because that simple act communicates all that you need to. Now, passing on information, that takes a little bit more communication. You have to be able to articulate what you're thinking, and the other person has to be able to understand it. And so you have to be communicating in a way that you speak the same language, and there might be some back and forth dialogue. But passing on a relationship is way more complicated than passing on an object or passing on information. It is more complicated because we learn relationships differently than we learn anything else. You see, relationships we learn by them being modeled to us, by witnessing the relationships we've seen around us, which this is good news and bad news. I mean, if you think about your own marriage, if you think about the relationships you have in your life, those are all modeled after relationships you've seen. So your relationship with your spouse is modeled after the relationship you saw interplaying between your parents, and having that played out. And you might say, no, my relationship with my spouse is not like the relationship with my parents, but it's all based on that. Now, let me explain. You see, there are some elements of your parents' marriage where you might say, I really liked that. I really liked the way that my parents interacted. I really liked the way they did that. And other things you might say, you know what, I don't want it to be like that. But it's all modeled after that base. And your spouse is also coming at it with the background of their parents' relationship. And this is why in premarital counseling, often they look at what kinds of families you grew up in, because those merging together is how you create the family life that you have. So how does this fit in to discipling our children? Well, if we're trying to pass on a relationship, then we have to model that relationship. We have to live it out in a way that our kids can see it. So there are 3 ways that we can be living out that relationship. First of all, we've talked about this before, let your kids see that relationship. Let them see your devotional life. Let them see your prayer life. This is hugely important, because if you want them to have a devotional life, if you want them to have a prayer life, then they need to see your devotional life, and they need to see your prayer life. They need to see, what does this actually look like when the rubber hits the road? What does that relationship look like? Because we're not just trying to pass on a set of beliefs. We're trying to pass on a relationship. The second way that we can model that relationship is our relationship with Jesus Christ plays out into our relationship with others, doesn't it? I mean, so as we're discipling our children, we have to allow them to see what exactly that looks like. We have to let them see what does it look like to get involved in ministry? How does it look like when I interact with those around me? And so, as a parent, it is critical for you to be involved in ministry. It's critical for you to be involved in your community. It's critical for you to be involved in your church. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because this is how we teach our children that it's the right thing to do. It's so easy for us to say, oh, this is important, this is what you should do. And as pastors, as church leaders, we say this from the front, but that is little to no meaning if we're not living it out. People are watching, your kids are watching. Discipleship isn't just teaching, it's modeling, it's living that out so that they can see this is what it looks like. Jesus and his disciples, every single day, he was living out what that looked like. How do we treat people? How do we treat the outcasts of society? How do we treat those who are being rejected by others? And Jesus modeled that out. So as parents, we too are called to live that out, to model what those relationships look like, to model how we can be involved in ministry, how we can participate in the body of Christ. And the third thing, this is going to sound obvious, but it's important in discipling our kids. And that is raising them in relationships that bring them closer to Jesus Christ. Love your children. Love your children, because that is one of the clearest ways to teach them who Jesus is. Love your children, because the extension of his love for you should be flowing through you into them. Love your spouse. Love your husband, love your wife in a way that models this is a healthy relationship. You want your kids to have healthy relationships with those around them. You want them to have a healthy relationship with Jesus Christ. So you need to model, what does that look like? There are going to be times when we mess up. There are going to be times when we fail, when we say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, where what we're modeling isn't what we want. That's okay. We're human, we make mistakes. Own up to those mistakes. Make it clear to your kids, this is not the ideal. What I just did, that's not following Jesus. That's not being a disciple. So that they can see that distinction. It's okay for you to mess up as long as you make it clear that that was a mistake and that wasn't the ideal. And then keep pushing for that ideal. Show your children the kinds of relationships you want them to have when they grow up. Show them the kind of church you want them to have when they grow up. Because imagine what it would look like if the kids growing up now, the church they grew up into is actually the church we've always wanted for them. And if we want that change to happen, it happens right now, right here. Not with them, but with us. Because we've got to model to them what that looks like.